Well, welcome back to the Gas Compression Podcast. I'm excited because today we've got our first person outside of the state of Texas. So Dave Rutherford is the senior rotating equipment engineer from Crestwood Midstream. He's a West Virginia native and a West Virginia University engineering grad who's been working in the Northeast natural gas industry for the past 13 years. His current role, Dave is supporting all the engines, compressors, pumps, and motors for Crestwood, and it's a gathering and processing company operating in most of the major shale plays. So I'm excited to talk to him about his experience in the gas industry, what he thinks the future holds, and we're going to touch on one of the latest buzzwords, which is ESG. So Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me on.
So let's start where I start with everybody is how in the world did you end up in the gas compression industry?
Yeah, well, if I give you the long and short answer, I always joke and say it goes back to my childhood when I took my toys apart to see how they worked. But, pretty much was always kind of a mechanically inclined person, always around, dirt bikes, jet skis, that kind of stuff. So I grew up, kind of in that realm. And then I went to school, they said, you're good with math, got engineering degrees. Actually started off in manufacturing and had relocated, was living out of state and didn't really like the job. And, saw this job for Dominion Transmission posted and applied for it. And went and interviewed and ended up, it was this rotating compression, engineer position, got it. And the rest is history. Here I am, been working for the past 13 years in the industry.
Awesome. So your current role at Crestwood is your title is rotating equipment engineer. So kind of tell me what your daily life looks like at Crestwood right now in that role.
Sure. So the main thing that in this role, I work out the operations group. So basically support all of our compression assets across the company. And like you mentioned before, we have assets in all the major shale plays. And then we also have an LPG storage and terminal distribution system where we store, either, propane or butane, different LPGs underground. So there's a lot of pumps and motors and things of that nature with those. So the biggest thing is tech support, any kind of, root cause analysis, failure analysis. My bread and butter is really compressor modeling. I started years ago. You had Norm Shade on, and the owner of ACI Services, and he's got a guy that works for him, Dwayne Hickman, that makes a software program. And that's actually what I got my start in the industry, was doing that software from ACI for Dominion. So I still use that software a good bit. I kind of akin it to maybe say an applications engineer, where I do a lot of selecting compressors, developing load steps, looking for better efficiencies, and just how to operate our compression so that we operate them the most effectively.
Cool. Well, let's talk about West Virginia and the Marcellus Shale, because like I said, we've only had people from Texas and really the Permian, the Eagle Ford Shale, and up here in the Panhandle. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know much. We've done a little bit of work for people out in West Virginia. It's like Pennsylvania, I think, but we've really never done any work for people out in West Virginia. So we don't know what you're running. Talk to us about what that's like over there in the coal mining state.
Sure. So like you said, the state started off, kind of primarily a coal mining state, back, I don't know, 1800s and early 1900s, whenever it was. Ton of little communities around, a lot of it's rural. I'm in one of the more populated areas, kind of near West Virginia University, where, WVU is. So, it's a little bit mountainous, hilly. I mean, it's not like out in, say, the Rockies. I'm going to Wyoming next week, but we don't have the plateaus like you there in Amarillo. We had some assets in Pampa I got to visit years ago, so it was nice there. But we do get snow, we do have winters, but it varies greatly because there's kind of a rich lean line on the Marcellus Shale. So farther east, where some of our assets are, that where I work out of in our Clarksburg, West Virginia office, is a little bit leaner gas. The farther west you go, it's a little bit richer. So Mark West has the Sherwood plant, which is one of the largest cryo plants on the East Coast, or in the whole, operating across the country, I guess. So our gas goes there as well. But, then you have areas up in like the Scranton area, Northeast PA, where a lot of that's, real high volumes, but it's, a drier, so to speak, lower BTU gas where it goes right into the transmission systems. We had a transmission system up there we just recently sold to Kinder Morgan called the Stagecoach Gas Services. So, I got to go visit that stuff as well. But, it's a huge shale play and it covers a lot of area. The biggest thing I'll tell you from my travels out to the Permian and, down in the Barnett that I'll give you versus up here is we got a lot more trees. So it kind of hides it a little better. You don't get that whole, the perception, the gas land that you see like on that documentary. But, it's
hold on. Which documentary are you talking about?
Oh, the Josh Fox documentary, Gasland and Gasland 2, where they're kind of going like, Wyoming and the Jonas Basin and the flyover. But But,
Okay.
I've spent time out in New Mexico, West Texas. We have assets out there, and, fortunate to go travel out there and get to see that stuff. But, we had a guy from out there come visit recently to see one of our stations. And he's like, man, this place is great. You got these trees in the woods. And I said, well, you need to come back in the fall. So in about 3 weeks is when all the deciduous trees will, their leaves will change color. And it turns all this, beautiful orange and red and yellow. And it's really one of the best times of year here to see that. Then you get, the winter, which we don't get as much snow as I remember as a kid. So, I don't get as much snowboarding time in as I'd like. But it's still home, and it's still a beautiful area, just like other parts of this country. So fortunate to live here.
So as far as compression goes up there, is it Cat aerial packages dominating like it is down here in Texas?
It really depends. We did a build out here when I got hired at Crestwood in 2013, and we put in we had 10 stations at the time, and I want to say 88 units. And we did have Cat aerials, but the majority of it was Waukesha aerials. So we had a lot of 7044s. So you got a mix. I mean, when I worked at Dominion, they had a mix. They kind of standardized on Cat aerial, but they had a lot of legacy compression. So, there was Ajaxes, Cooper Bessemers. They had some Clarks, a few Dressers. But, the biggest thing is new packages. This is primarily going to be high speed. And what you'll see is you'll kind of see that 3516 kind of JGK4 or JGT if we're talking Cats, JGK if you're talking walks. But the biggest thing is it depends on where the location is. So a lot of these locations where it's hilly, there's no flat ground left to where people want to sell you to build a compressor station or route your pipelines to. Mm-hmm. So what you'll have is kind of the difficulty of getting units up on site. My preference as a compression engineer, you got to weigh it both ways, because I've done project management, project engineering, and construction management. So it's kind of that cost and that, buildability, the operability. So it's one of the things where if you could get the units there, the bigger units, well, I'd rather set bigger units. You got 4 or 5 big units versus 10 or 11 smaller units. But then what you run into is you can't get the big units up, across the bridges, up the hills. We had to dozer every tractor trailer with a skid up them. And it's actually kind of funny because, working on a project now to decommission the station. And, the contractor's like, well, we got to take those engines off. I'm like, nope, I was here in 13 when we built it, stressed out, trying to get this place running. And there wasn't a dozer, or there wasn't an engine or there was an engine on the skid, and the dozer dragged it up the hill. So biggest thing is it's a mix, to tell you the truth. If you get into the low pressure gathering, like Dominion had a system there here in West Virginia, I spent a lot of time in where it was like conventional wells and kind of low flows. They put a lot of Ajaxes in. And, mm-hmm. I kind of got a soft spot in my heart for Ajaxes. There's just something about them. They just always run.
I hear that a lot. So 13 years in, tell me kind of your progression from, hiring on to, to where you are now. What are you seeing? You mentioned when I asked you, or I'd asked you for some questions earlier about some mistakes that you may have made, switching companies too early, and kind of tell everyone out there listening who's just getting started or been doing this for a little bit. What do you think about that?
So, well, like I said, I started off at Dominion in compression services, and I was only doing just the compressor modeling, that only aspect. Whereas now it's like I am compression services at Crestwood, and there's only me. So, not trying to toot my own horn or anything like that, because it's both good and bad. Because people rely on you, and then there's no one look over my shoulder and ask for help like there was when I was at Dominion, and they had tons of seasoned people. So, I had took the risk and went to our engineering department at Dominion to be a project manager. And it was one of those things where for me, it was kind of scary, lateral move, gave up a company vehicle in an office for a cubicle and parking down the street to walk to the office. But it gave me that knowledge of I got out of that comfort zone. Mm-hmm. So I was able to take that risk and grow from it. Now, at the time, I was kind of like, wow, what was I thinking? I should just stayed where I was. But I grew from it, learned a lot more of the business, and then ended up, I left and I went to Williams for a little while, and, was going to relocate, going to move, didn't do the due diligence, got to a different town, was staying up there and went, man, I don't want to move here. I don't want to go through the stress of selling my house, dealing with this. So I was kind of a bit of a job jumper, and it's one of those where, depends on what role you are. It's probably not a good thing. I've put my time in now where, I've got the most time in the industry here at Crestwood, and I'm fortunate to work for such a good company. They've really treated me well. I'm proud to work here. But, the mistakes I'll say is, get out of your comfort zone and learn. Don't just rely on someone else. So don't make that mistake of just, taking the status quo. And then the other thing is put your time in, learn as much as you can, find those people to either mentor you or you can mentor, to learn from. And I mean, there's a ton of smart people in this industry, a lot of good, hardworking Americans that work in this industry. And, I kind of have that pride because it's ours. This is our technology. those old Coopers, this has been around for so long to where, this is our industry. We love it. It's America's energy future, right? So, just take that all in and just, embrace it.
Yeah. Now, do you directly manage mechanics and people on that level, or do you have people doing that for you?
No, I am strictly just in a tech support role where I support all our different assets. Our mechanics and operators report up through the management and the local operations up through the chain. So I do work hand in hand with a lot of our mechanics and area leaderships where, if they're having technical support issues, it can range anything from, we were having softfoot issues on a unit in the Barnett, say a month ago because the alignment was off. And another unit out in the Permian was having a DNFT problem where it was shutting down, they're calling me going, well, we've changed everything. And I'm like, try pulling new wire. We had this happen once. It was a short and ended up that's what it was. So, but a lot of it, how I'm successful in my role now is just having a good memory and having that experience of, when something breaks, you got to solve those problems. And, like I said, know who to call. I've got a coworker that always says, I don't need to know everything. I just need to know the people to call that do.
That's a good point. Well, I asked that question because how is the labor force in the West Virginia and in your area? I know in our area, mechanics are getting harder to come by. So how's that out there? Is that the same thing or?
I think it's a little bit of give and take. So, I have to look at it like this. We have a guy that's from the Barnett and, he's a great guy. I love the guy to death. And he told me one time where he was talking, I was looking at Google Earth with him one time or something. He goes, it was a different time back then. He talks about kind of the Barnett heydays, right? And unfortunately for us, the Marcellus, of course, not to get political, but, given the legislature it's going on now and everything and all the climate, it's, things are slower now, right? So in 13, 12, 13, 14, when the peak Marcellus shale boom was on, it was extremely hard to find people. They were pulling people out of the Walmart, every bus driver, garbage man that had a CDL was out driving, a bottle truck or, flatbed, doing hot shots. So those times it was tough to find, good people. Now we're fortunate to where the workforce we have in our local Marcellus operations has been with us for a good while now. So there's a lot of good mechanics and good operators that we have and, consider them all family. Would hate to lose any of them. Mm-hmm. And, we've had turnover just like anyone else. We've had guys leave. We've had guys come back. So, I think if that tells you anything, to work for a company where people would want to come back and work there, says something about our leadership and our management. But yeah, it's a little easier now just because, say, the boom's not on and not everybody's scrambling, out building pipelines and compressor stations, process plants, et cetera. But it's also tough because, you don't have as many open positions now as say we did in, 13 or even like 16, 17 when things were some better times. But, I think everybody's kind of got that same, whether it's the Mark West or the Intera Resources, National Fuel Gas, whoever the companies are. And there's a ton of them in our industry, right, all across America. But so, I can see it both ways. So, it's kind of one of those where, yes, it's tight, but then it's not tight. It just depends. But there's some good companies like, Dominion Transmission, which sold and is now Berkshire Hathaway, and Columbia Gas is now TC Energy, and then EQT, which those companies have been in our area for a long time. And a lot of it's generational, kind of like the coal mines where, say your father worked in the mines, your dad worked in the mines, grandfather, et cetera. So it's kind of like that with the gas industry, but it really just depends on the area. And, we had a big influx of people from, Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma when the boom hit. And I used to count all the, Schlumberger trucks or Halliburton trucks going up the interstate to work and going, why are all these people here? And of course, it was Marcellus Shale.
Mm-hmm. So do you guys follow the same cycle as, the Permian Basin? You mentioned boom and bust. That happens very, that's a very intense season in our area. Same thing for you. Is it just exactly like you guys? Gas prices are gas prices. So if it's this shale or that shale, it doesn't matter. You guys experience the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. I think in our area, the pricing is a little bit more constrained just because there's not as many pipelines to get the gas out of the area. Uh-huh. And, one of the things I've read, of course, there's a lot of, energy groups in the area that's always promoting, the Marcellus Shale and how big it is. And I think, now this was years ago, so things, come down now, but I think it was, if you took Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, we outproduced Texas in gas. If you take those three states. Yeah. Really? And I want to say, it's not, so the U.S. is still second to Russia, I believe, but it's still one of those. If you added Texas and all of them in, the amount of gas we produce. So, like I said, for us, it does follow the pricing. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of upheaval, I guess, where the ACP Atlantic Coast Pipeline that was kind of partners. I want to say it was like Duke, Dominion, a few others. They shelved it, didn't do it. And that was a big pipeline that would have helped get gas out of the area. There's another one that EQT's doing, the Mountain Valley Pipeline. It's, faced a lot of, stoppages and whatnot, different court cases. And, it's well over schedule now. And unfortunately for us, that kind of doesn't help us get the gas out of the area. But, the thing is a lot of those markets, I don't know if you're familiar with, the Rockies Express line years ago that Kinder put in and was taking gas, from the west here east and kind of stopped at the Ohio River. Now it's been reversed for how many years sending gas west. So there's a lot of that where, if we had the pipelines to get the gas out of the area or Shell, that's back 2010, 11, how long ago that's been, where it's almost up and built. But, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia was all kind of courting Shell to build this cracker plant, which it's north of Pittsburgh. And I haven't been by there in a while, so maybe I'll swing by there when I come out of the airport when I come home next week. But, I've definitely heard, it's one of those, being a construction guy, having worked in construction, it's like, kind of like to be around that stuff. It's something to see. But once that gets done and they can take all that ethane and turn it into ethylene and make plastics, I think it'll be a good thing for the area.
When do they think they're going to have that completed?
I thought it was supposed to be the end of 21, but it might be 2022. I've kind of been out of the loop. I'm about 2 hours from Pittsburgh, so I don't really catch the news as much up there. But it's definitely one of those things where, we need more, stuff like that. When I talk about like our energy independence and, American energy for American manufacturing, American jobs. I think it's one of those, I started off in manufacturing. So, grew up beside a railroad, family worked in the coal mines. So I'm all for, putting our workers first. And I think that's, good jobs and, good paying jobs and the kind of jobs when you talk about the industry, it's not just, the compressor station operator, the mechanic or the pipeline operator or the excavator operator, truck driver, whatever. It's everyone. Everyone benefits from these types of jobs from our industry.
Would the Keystone Pipeline, would that affect you guys if it were to be built?
I don't think so. Not necessarily. We have a rich play, like I said, farther west, but it's more, the NGLs. It's more the ethane to butane to propane. Now there are, refineries on the East Coast and things of that nature. I know there's some in Ohio where, Mark West has like a fractionator where they fractionate their NGLs out. But, like I said, we have a trucking business and they call it the MSL, marketing, supply, and logistics, where we do haul, different liquid products. So I know our marketing guys, and I've been in meetings before where they're talking about, hauling out of, I think there's Illinois, there's a refinery that's a big one. But yeah, I don't think it would affect us that much. It would be nice to be able to get any, oil that we do produce. Most of our gas is an associated gas to where, they're going after, oil versus NGLs. So most of ours is more, natural gas and the NGLs, not necessarily the oil coming out of the ground.
Is there a lot of drilling going on up there right now?
Well, my area, it's kind of slow. The producer we gather for started their own midstream, so they're kind of drilling farther west in the richer liquids area. But if you take kind of the Wheeling area, I could give you the bird, the state bird they call West Virginia, looks like kind of the middle finger. But in that northern panhandle, kind of the Wheeling area, kind of southwestern PA, if you just start drawing, bigger circles, whether it's miles or hours, whatever driven, there's still a lot of good bit of stuff in that area. Yeah. So that's kind of still the hotbed. And then, of course, over in Ohio, where the Utica Shale is not as deep, that's a kind of a bigger area. And it does have more of a liquids play with oil that people are drilling. But things are slower now. It's not, I know the Permian's picking up. We've got assets in the Permian and we're doing some new stuff out there. And I don't really hear as much about the northeast area of PA, like I told you, where it's more the drier gas. But it's like you said before, it's more, price based. And right now prices are up a little bit. So, yeah, you're seeing activity. But I think it's one of those where most producers are just trying to keep, at least a couple rigs active. But it's not like the heyday in 13 where you drove down the interstate and could count 50 rigs in a 2-hour drive.
Right. Is Crestwood, is that part of y'all's strategy? Are you guys doing any drilling? No, Crestwood as a company, you're just strictly doing transportation.
Yeah, we're strictly gathering and process. We do have a transmission system down on the Gulf of Mexico, kind of outside of Houston, where it's salt cavern storage. I got to go there a few weeks back and visit that compressor station. Done some work there, doing some automation on the load steps and compressor pockets. But since we got rid of our Northeast assets, it's primarily just gathering and process. And, we have assets, like I said, the Bakken, the Marcellus, Barnett, the Permian, and then the Powder River Basin in Wyoming.
Going back to the personnel side of our industry, I have I'm going to have booking a guy that I'm not exactly sure where he is, but he's the director of a technical school for our industry doing natural gas compression. What is something that you'd like to say to him in terms of, hey, here's the kind of people that we're looking for. Here's my suggestion, having been in it for 13 years. Here's my suggestion to the technical and the compression schools out there. Here's what people need to learn. Here's what the type of people you're looking for. What would you say to that?
I think the biggest thing would be, I don't want to say more hands-on. I've went and spoke and actually taught a class last year during COVID for the little local community college. And, it's tough because having been, 2 engineering degrees, got an associate's degree in drafting and, been part of this little technical school local, focus more on what guys are going to use out in the field. What are the workers going to use? So, I get people need to have the technical writing or say the communication classes to be able to speak to management, be able to type out, a well-worded email, right? But a lot of it, what I would see is, the class I was teaching was kind of this intro to mechanics. And it was about, belts and gears and pulleys. And I get that you kind of got to, crawl, walk, run, right? But it was one of those kind of things where, I had the same thing when I got in the industry. Here I've got all this math background, chemistry, physics, whatever, and then you use very little of it. So the biggest thing I would say is, pick out the main jobs there are, whether it's pipeline operator, compressor station operator, mechanic, and teach those skills. You know what I mean? Like, how many times, people break off easy outs and bolts because they think that's the way to get them out. And a seasoned mechanic goes, no, those things are junk. They're just going to ruin your day. Don't do it,
Yeah.
So that's my biggest thing is, yeah, I get you got to have the coursework, but focus on, the actual jobs you need to have, teach them about, the ethics of the industry and doing, the right thing, making sure, like we were talking about ESG, being, sustainable, safety is a big thing, focus on the safety. I mean, we've literally had 4 or 5 bad accidents in whatever the hour stretch of road that I typically communicate or commute on in the past like couple weeks. And it's one of those where I'm like, this is it. People's on their phones, they're not paying attention. And it took me a long time, but 13 years of the gas industry drilling these driving habits into me have really taken hold. And I'm always trying to, impress those upon other people like my girlfriend, where it's like, you need to slow down, get off your phone, you'll get there. If you're going to be late, you're going to be late. So that's kind of, I guess, my biggest thing is teach more of the life skills that's needed in the industry and in the pass down, generation know-how versus, okay, here's how you do, calculate a formula, right? Or here's how, you do this or that.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. You mentioned ESG and environmental, sustainability, and governmental. So, how is that affecting Crestwood? Or is that part of your daily life right now? Are you guys kind of under pressure to reduce emissions? And what's that for you right now?
Sure. No, it totally is. I mean, that's the, ESG, the sustainability and governance, that's the big buzzword in the industry right now. And it definitely is. So we've taken a lot of steps. We do a yearly sustainability report, which a lady puts out. Very good report if you ever want to read it about the company. And, we focus on things like our emissions. So what can we do to reduce those emissions? So we've done everything as far as, we've used company come in when we blow down a pipeline to do any kind of service work to where we can pull the pipeline down. So instead of venting, say, 1,000 PSI, 100 PSI, whatever it is for that, mileage, pull it down to where it's only like, 50 PSI, blow it down, or 5 PSI and blow it down. I work a lot where several years ago, I developed an entire list of at a compressor station. Here's all the things you could do to save gas. Here's, whether it's blowdowns, whether it's, using pneumatic gas instead of instrument air for your pneumatic controls, start air versus start gas and what that looks like, blowing down pig receivers, blowing down filter seps. So we focused on a lot of things like installing electric compression instead of gas engine compression. So that's one of the big things we've done in the past 3-4 years, installing a lot of electric compression. Now, of course, the reliability engineer in me says, well, that's even great because, you get a little bit better reliability out of electric motor versus the engine. Of course, the engine guy in me hurts a little because I'd rather see engines, but I get it. Everything from, we have a no flaring policy to where, we don't want our producers to flare. So, like if they have an upset, they would have to flare, basically instead of putting it into the pipeline. So install more vapor recovery units, VRUs, installing those on tank batteries and things of that nature, and then using those effectively like blowing down compressors through, say, a scrubber dump versus just a local, to a silencer or to a local vent. That way you can recover that gas. So there's a lot of things we're doing like that. Low emissions packing is a big one we're doing this year, trying out different versions of LEP to try to reduce, packing leaks. So it's a big push. And then the other thing that I'm proud of with the company is our when you talk about like kind of the social aspect of it is our involvement in the communities. We do a lot of volunteer work. We donate a lot of money to the different areas that we operate in, whether it's schools. I know in North Dakota they donated money to help build a school for one of the tribes up there. So it's a really good thing, as far as supporting the areas we work in and supporting those communities.
You mentioned you came up with a list about several ways to save gas and different things. Is that published anywhere that I could point people, like LinkedIn or anything like that?
No, but depends on who it is. I'd be happy to share some of it with them. A lot of it's kind of the best practices, so to speak, of compressor stations,
Right.
and a lot of it going back to teaching and training and all that. It's that knowledge. It's just the things I've seen work and not work, and kind of go, hey, we ought to have a better way of doing this. So it kind of gets into the whole efficiency and reliability and redundancy of compressor stations. And if you talk about what could change or things different, we always kind of laugh around our office and go, we like to be a little busier, but we don't want like 2013 times. But, I've seen a lot of this where like engineering firms will staff up for the booms and then lay off for the bus. And then you don't always get that knowledge, or you get what I've told once was tribal knowledge, where it's like, everybody in the tribe kind of believes that, but it may not be the best way. Right. So, I kind of have that fight, it's always that fight between operations and project management. And then I'm trying to be the mediator going, okay, well, let's try this, this way, because, path one didn't work last time. And there's a lot of that goes on. And unfortunately, in the industry, it all comes down to cost too. So, and timing. So what happens is you've always got somebody that's going to undercut you, low bid you as far as getting that next business deal. So the business development guys are trying to get the work. And then the project managers, engineers, engineering firms are trying to design those facilities based around that budget. Mm-hmm. Whereas I come in and I always say it's cheaper to do it up front. I give the analogy like, hey, I'd love to have spray foam insulation in my house, make it more heat efficient, right, or cooling efficient. But I'm not going to rip all the drywall off the inside or all the siding off the outside to do that. So unfortunately, it should have been done when the house was built. So there's a lot of that too, where in my role with doing like compressor automation and putting the automatic pockets on units and setting them up so that they run most efficiently, it's super expensive to come back in and do it after the fact. Right. I was fortunate. I talked about there outside of Houston there on the Gulf, where we had a facility that when we bought it, already had that. Now, it wasn't automated to the best most often it was. And I got to do a project over the past 2 years to fix that. And, it's running really well now. So I can point to that for, my boss and upper management and say, hey, listen, we ought to automate more units, do this. They run more effectively. But it's always cheaper to spend that money on the front end versus come back in and retrofit.
Oh yeah. Now, do you guys own your compressors? Do you rent them? What y'all's fleet looks like?
We have a mix. The majority of our fleet is high speed. We do have some centrifugal. We had more when we had our Northeast assets where we had some motor driven centrifugals, but mm-hmm. we probably own 95%, 90% of all of our assets. And the majority of them are either, a Waukesha aerial or a CAT aerial. And that ranges from 3516s, 3606s, 08s, 12s. I think we got rid of our 12s, but we got, a handful of 3616s. It's kind of nice to see those. But
so you're able to, no way, but they always run. So you guys are able to make those changes automation wise, or if you feel like you want to try something those are your compressors, you own them, you can do whatever you want with them.
Right. And we do have some contract compression where a third party operates it. And we, had some meetings recently where, they were running their units. And, the biggest thing that I always get people with a recip, an aerial publishes like the unloading philosophies at its speed. And if I had $1 for every operator that tells me they run better, slower, I could retire right now because, say a 3516 is rated 1400 RPM. Well, it runs better slower. And I'm like, yeah, well, aerial says the compressor is good for 15. So you're already running at 100 RPM slower. Well, but it runs better. Well, speed's the killer on flow. So in a gathering application, flow's the name of the game. These things are running 24/7. Mm-hmm. You want to move as much flow you can with the minimal number of units. So the best horsepower per million. And, that's the struggle where I always try to keep our units loaded 90 to 95% load on a day-to-day operation for a non-automated, say manual unit. Now, of course, they'll have suction control valves, recycle control valves at stations. But that's kind of the whole name of the game with efficiency is run the minimal number of units. So it's always a struggle where, if we keep loading the compressors up and keeping them loaded up, it'll keep pulling the wells down, pulling the pipeline down. So, what's the point, like say we have a 10 unit station and they're all running 90%. Well, that's the same as running 9 at 100%. And then you're saving that OpEx, you're not spending the oil, you're not burning the fuel gas, the wear and tear on the units. So all that comes into it. So it's always that balance of trying to keep those units loaded up. And we try to look at it at least quarterly to keep the units loaded to where we're running a minimal number of units, but moving the most amount of gas we can.
Yeah. Well, kind of switching gears and looking toward the future, what do you, personally and as a representative of Crestwood, what do you guys see as the future for our industry?
Well, I definitely think that the industry is going to be around for a while. When I was a freshman at WVU, all the engineering takes the same engineering courses, and the different departments would come in and try to court you to come to theirs. And, I thought then, well, mining and petroleum, maybe my lifetime, but not my kids, there'll be a job. And, I think we're all confident that this is going to be around a while. It's part of our energy future that, not to get on the whole political thing, because I'm pretty moderate on most things, but, Michael Moore put out a documentary talking about, the cost of all this green push and the movement. And, there's still going to be diesel trucks hauling stuff. So I think the industry is still going to be here. We definitely need to do all the ESG stuff and do the right things and be good stewards of the environment and do things as green as we can. So I think you'll see over time more regulation, obviously, as technologies get better. But that's the biggest thing that I look forward to in the industry. And, when I was in college, I hated statistics. And the thing about statistics is couldn't stand them, didn't want to learn them. And now it's I see the beauty of the data. So a lot of stuff we're looking at is installing condition monitoring, where it's continually looking at, what's these pressures, what's these temperatures, what's the speed. And then that way you can do predictive analytics and predict, hey, we're going to have a failure because the vibration has spiked so many inches per second in the past 24 hours. So I think you'll see a lot of that with the digital age and the Internet of Things and automation, as far as, with all the cloud-based and data applications, to where we'll collect all this data and then we'll be able to do things, faster, more efficient, better because of that. And, I think on the production side, you've seen it already. When I first got into the Marcellus boom, 12 and 13, a long lateral was 4,000 or 5,000 foot. And now it's, probably last I think I saw the record was 27,000, 28,000 foot for a lateral. And how many stages is that on the well? Right. So you're seeing a lot of less disruption, as far as you don't need as many well pads. You can hit, if they had 4 well pads to hit these, 20 wells, now they can do it with 2 well pads, and they got 10 wells each on the well pad. Yeah. Talking about Norm Shade, we talked earlier, one of the OGs, he's definitely in the Hall of Fame. You compare with Jim Buckwald from Ariel. But, T. Boone Pickens, God rest his soul, he passed away there a few years back. He pushed for the CNG highway. And that was a big thing that Terra Resources was pushing when I got into the shale boom in 13, was they were wanting to put all these CNG fueling stations. And I thought it was a great thing. There's a lot of big cities already do it for the, garbage trucks, UPS, the buses, et cetera. And, I would like to see more of that, using the CNG. Of course, part of it is with OPEC and gasoline prices, where if gasoline prices are, down, so to speak, compared to what, not the whatever peak in 2008, $4 or $5 a gallon it was. Yeah. So I think, if we saw a lot of more of that, more petrochemical using, obviously plastics are not going away, and that's a feedstock for plastics. Of course, the fertilizer industries and whatnot. So we're always going to have this industry. It's just, I feel like we really need to use the industry for those byproducts, and definitely grow it for that, and have more, American manufacturing, American jobs, et cetera.
So going forward, we all keep hearing that word efficiency, compressors and stations, and everything needs to be more efficient. So as an engineer, I kind of feel like that's part of your job, is kind of always thinking and looking towards the future. So how can we as an industry, and you as a company, how can we be more efficient? Are there things that you can share that say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we plan to do, those kinds of things for compressor stations and plants?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing is, kind of taking it all in, as far as that list I told you I come up with saving gas. And, there's definitely efficiency means in there. So, start air versus start gas, and again, that's an expensive change that should be done up front when you build a facility, because you're still trading one energy form for another. So whether you're using gas to start engines versus using air, you're still spending energy as far as the electricity for the air compressors, for basically, whatever you have to have that additional air volume to start those units. And of course, more money up front, because you have the air receivers, different air compressors and whatnot. Having vapor recovery units, the engineer in me loves vapor recovery units, but then the operations guy in me sees the pain of them, because leaking dump valves. It's great to have a VRU, but if you have a leaking dump valve, it's just going to cause that VRU to run, more and take more energy. So that's kind of where that whole, automation, controls, Internet of Things comes in, where if you would have, say, a clamp on ultrasonic on your drain line to catch a leaking dump valve, or you would have things like, say, a pressure transducer where you can monitor the pressure of that line. Tying stuff into common vent headers to where you can run it to a VRU, say packing vents. We talked about packing vents. We're trying different LEPs and seeing what we like, what we don't like. We've been working with Ariel as far as their new BTUU packing at one of our facilities in the Barnett. So I'm going, well, that's great that, we've got these lower leak rate packings. They use less oil to where you don't have to use as much oil on the compressor rod. But what if we install a monitor that monitors when it is leaking? So we know when it is leaking excessively and we can trend it and then repair it accordingly. But one of the biggest things I'll tell you is the struggle, and I've given several presentations on this throughout my career, is compressor selection. And to select the best compressor for the application, typically, your facility design, planning, et cetera, business development, they give you a design point of here's this suction pressure, here's this discharge pressure, and what flow we need. And I always joke and say it's the one point the compressor's designed for that it never runs in, because compressors run on such a wide application that you never run there. So, you can have units where all the pockets are closed and it's in load step 1, double acting on all cylinders, and it's 85% load. That's not as efficient as if it was running at 100% load and you were running 2 units instead of 3. So part of the struggle I have is the cost of selling like recylindering units. And we've done it, we've looked at it, and it's the cost of going and, different coolers and different pulsation bottles and different cylinders. It sinks it. You're almost cheaper to go buy a new unit that's packaged accordingly and sized accordingly for your application versus, making something work. And a lot of my job is make it work, right? We deactivate ends, we unload, we've got units that are 4-cylinder, 3-stage. It's only got 3 cylinders it's running. So that's the biggest thing efficiency wise, I would say, is, having your numbers correct up front, and then, not necessarily say, hey, we're going to do LEP, but look at what the LEP gets you and then, monitoring it. And then the biggest thing is everybody wants to know, what are you actually saving? So that's where you need that measurement anyway. So.
Right. Well, I really enjoyed having you on, Dave. And I think we could probably, I would challenge you to put all of this information in some kind of presentation that you could give to the industry. I feel like I could have you back on for like a specific show of like, hey, here's how you can lower emission. Here's, 6 easy steps to lower emissions or something. I think that'd be really helpful. It'd be really helpful. So
I appreciate you having me on, Mike. It was a good time, and, appreciate people like you in the industry, getting a positive word out for us and getting people involved and getting them excited to work in this industry. It's, I'm a lifer at this point. It's one of those early on didn't know, how it was going to work out, but I'm really thankful that I kind of slipped and fell into an industry that suits myself. And, it's here, it's home based, it's American, it's afforded me to go see the country and all these different shell plays. And, it's one of those where just thankful to be in the industry and thankful to have met a lot of good people and, had a good career so far.
Good. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your passion for the industry, and a lot, and I'm sure our paths will cross as you're probably going to be making changes and moving this industry forward. So thanks again for coming on, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
See ya.
See you, man.